Well, welcome back, coaches. Welcome back to part two of defensive roles and responsibilities. In part one, which you need to go watch, I'm sure, we talked about the keeper, center backs, and the wide 7 and 11. Today, we're going to talk about the 9, which has defensive responsibilities, and the 8, perhaps the most complicated position on the field. So, we're going to get into that. But before we do, I'm going to ask once again if you could share this with your fellow coaches, hit the like button, and most important, subscribe. About 20% of the viewers are subscribed. That means 80% of you are watching this, and I appreciate it. But if you could just hit that little button, it'd mean the world to me. It helps me do other things when I get that count up on YouTube, and it also means that other coaches could find this info. We're just trying to make sure that our kids get the best soccer education we can, and you can help with that. Thanks. So let's now get into the 8 and the 9 and learn something about that. Okay. Since this is part two, we've looked at this before, but it bears repeating as we look at the last two positions, the 9 and the 8. Again, in the most balanced of games, you only have the ball half the time. What you do without the ball is just as important as what you do with it, because again, if you've got an even match, that's 50% of the game you don't have the ball. The game cycle, attack, transition to defense, defend, transition to the attack, is never ending, and those transition phases are always the most dangerous. We're looking at that transition to defense and defend. We're looking at the transition phases here, transition to defense and defending in these videos, but what we talk about here can apply to all these things. And again, teaching your players what their role is in defending when they're in these positions is super important for their development and for your team. So let's look at the striker. Now, many people incorrectly think the striker has very little to do on the defensive side of the ball. And that's not really true in the modern game. The striker has a lot to do. It's just a little bit more subtle and becomes more and more important higher up and bigger fields when you go to 9v9 and 11v11. So their primary job is to screen and pressure those opposition center backs. We want to try and take the easy pass backwards away so that if we do have a team in the corner in our zone and we've got a good defensive structure, they can't just turn around and play an easy ball backwards and play around to the other side of the field through their center backs and now try to attack us on the other side. It's mentally demanding because they have to maintain awareness and movement without the ball for sometimes long periods and still be ready to receive that ball to counterattack. If you're up against a really good team and your team doesn't have the ball 50% of the time, maybe we only have it 30% of the time and we're defending in our zone, it can be very easy to kind of switch off and stop doing the right things, movement without the ball. So it's really important mentally that they're strong, that they keep working even if they don't have the ball. In defense, they're preventing that opposition center back from provide that outlet when the play is down low and they can't go any further from turning around and playing backwards. And again, they also must be ready to receive a ball that was won by teammates to transition to the attack and escape the center backs they've been screaming. So they need to be close to them, but be ready to try and burst past them if they get the ball. They're also the trigger for the rest of the team to counterpress if we're now counterpressing the opposition's half, but they have to, again, be aware of their teammates' positions and readiness to support their press. Otherwise, it's a wasted effort. One player chasing the ball is not a press. It's just a player wasting their energy. And again, if you go back and look at the pressing video, we talk about pressing triggers and how the 9, a lot of the times, is the key player to start the press. They work mostly solo, but they do have some relationships with other positions on the field that we'll take a look at. So here's our number 9 here at the top of the field. So you can see when the ball is in our half, the 9 has slid over to the side where the ball is, and they're basically providing pressure and screening that 4 to make it uncomfortable for that wide winger to take this ball and turn around and pass it backwards because they're lurking here. The other advantage of this player maintaining their positioning on the side of the field with the ball is that if the 7 wins it, they just need to be able to look up to see if they can get this player to spin in behind or throw that ball up there, relieving the pressure and allowing your team to now do that transition to attack. As the ball has split over to this side, now your 9 has to do this hard running without the ball from one side of the field to the other, again, to now do the same job. Screen this opposite center back and be an outlet in case your team wins the ball on this side of the field. Even when the ball is deep in your half, the 9 has to remain high up the field. They cannot get pulled down into this part of the field, because if you win the ball, all your players are now marked or covered by opposition players, and it's going to be very difficult for you to break this pressure and get up the field. So staying high, it's difficult for young players staying up the field. They want to go where the ball is. So early on, if you have to, with third graders especially, you can tell them you can't leave the circle. It's not ideal, but at least it's a starting point to get them to understand, if the ball's in my half, I need to stay up near the halfway line. Now, in the opposition half, they're the primary pressure if the ball is lost, or if we're restarting a play from a dead ball. As we looked at the pressing video, they're the ones, whether it's a goal kick, they're the ones that are going after the ball, or if the ball is lost in a space, they're the ones trying to put pressure on the ball. As you can see here, we have used this clever, we talked about curving their run, especially from goal kicks, to cut the field in half so that this player can't simply turn and play to this player. They're being invited to push the play out this way. And the 9 does a lot of these curved runs at players to try and force the play to one direction or the other. The 9, while they're isolated up here, they definitely have a relationship with the 8, especially in the opposition half. Again, when we talked about the advanced pressing, they could switch with the 8. Go back and watch that video. And they do have relationships, especially with the 7 and 11s, if they're winning the ball out wide and that 9 is shuttling side to side to be that outlet. They're helping protect the 7 or the 11, because the opposition can't just easily make a pass backwards and maybe pass through over them. And also, again, if we win the ball, we want this player to be ready to receive. So now let's get to the 8. It's the most complicated and difficult position on the field, because there's so many roles and responsibilities, especially as they get older and on the bigger field. So again, it's super important to start this training in 3rd and 4th grade, because it just is progressive. Every year they're going to learn a little bit more and a little bit more to make them successful as they go forward. It's mentally and physically demanding, because they have to maintain awareness of multiple players around them, and they have to be ready to assume a different position to cover for a teammate. They're next to or adjacent to every other position on the field except goalkeeper. In the defense, they're screening the area directly in front of the center backs, controlling the center of the field. So they act as kind of a first gatekeeper to keep play from coming right down the center, to push that play out to one side to the other where one of your center backs will be waiting. You'll see the triangle that they make, and that's one of the strongest pieces that 8 can do. As we talked about, often they can assume almost any other position to provide cover or assistance if a player gets pulled out of positions. We talked about the relationships. And again, in 77, that center midfield could be asked to play as a 6, a defensive mid, an 8, a box-to-box midfielder, or a 10, an attacking mid, depending on the phase of the situation. But all the concepts we're going to look at are going to be the same. It's just maybe their starting position is going to vary depending on how high or low up the field they're positioned when the transition happens. So here's our number 8 right in the middle of the field, obviously. They act as a screen for this 4 and the 5. So they dictate the play as it comes down the center, trying to keep opposition players from coming right through. They can even drop in to make a back 3 when needed, but really their job is to engage to make sure that this is not an area that gets exploited right down the middle. As you can see here, the 8 has come out. They've engaged this player, and now they're forcing play this way. So now they're forcing play into the 11, compressing this space, making it easier to then gang up on this grouping of players where it's 2v2 or maybe 3v2 on our side. As the 5 slides over, they're maintaining this triangle, and they're maintaining this positioning to maintain this strong position guarding this area as the ball's wide. They may have to drop in, as they say, to make a line of 3, but their idea here is this wide player doesn't have a clear path into these players, and if they play this ball backwards, the 8 is available to make quick pressure. So it's this relationship and triangle that's super strong and super important. If the 5 overcommits or has to step out, maybe the 11 has been beat, the 8 then is in a great position just to step into this void while the 5 goes out wide. Sometimes the 8 can go out wide, but again, it's there to be aware of what's happening around them, because again, they have empathy for their teammates because they've played all the positions, and this is where the 8 can come into play using their intelligence. They could even be the player who provides that wide pressure because perhaps the 11 got beat up the field and they're knocked back in position and they don't have their full complement in attack. The 8 can be that player that goes out wide if the 11 isn't anywhere to be found. It does make it a little bit more risky here, and you hope that your 11 is coming in to fill in behind, but it's better than leaving this player free or this 5 stepping out and leaving a big gap. In the opposition half, while they're in support of the attack, they're also the seal. They're almost like the safety in a football system where they're looking for, if something goes wrong, they're near enough to cover and also block these passing lanes. So a lot of times the 8 is covering space when we're in this space in the attacking half, not necessarily a person. So they're in a great position to support the ball with us, but they're also in a great position to slow down a counterattack if we lose the ball. One of the key things that is hard for an 8 at the 7v7 game, grade 3 and 4, is they tend to want to just push up until the next two are in line with the 9. So one of the key phrases that really has become important for teams that I've coached and work very well is to tell this player they need to remain behind the ball. If you can get them to remain behind the ball, and if they're behind the ball, they're not going to get themselves in a position like this. They're always going to then be able to keep that ball in front of them, and that will more than likely keep them in the spacing and the spot that you want them to be. When we have central play and maybe the ball's turned over, they really need to have excellent spatial awareness, learning how to scan to see what's going on, because again, they're defending a space, not necessarily a player. But here, knowing what the situation is, the more dangerous pass is this player here. So being able to slide into this space to cut off this pass to force the play into the center, where then they have time and space to now come over, is really an important skill. Being able to have that situational and spatial awareness is a skill that will take time and not all your players will be good at, but it's something to work with them to keep their head on a swivel and keep looking around. Obviously, as we talked about, they have a key relationship with basically every player on the field, even the keeper, because they have a direct line to them many times. They're there to keep a player from walking down the middle. But being able to assume and connect to all these things can be a challenging job for any young player. You'll probably find on your team that you have 2 or 3 players that just have that natural gift of being able to be aware and command that space and connect the game together. And these can be some of your most valuable and skilled players going forward. So the 8 is really a vital position in defense, but it's also a very difficult one for learning novice players in grade 3 and 4. We talked about this before, but each position has a role to play in that general defensive scheme. Go look at part 1 again. We talk about the first 3 positions, the goalkeeper, the center backs, and the wide players, the 7s and the 11s. These basically concepts are easily scaled up all the way to 11v11. That's why I really love the 1-2-3-1. You're covering all the basics right away in grades 3 and 4. You have to work to develop the understanding of each role with your players through whiteboard sessions, small-sided games, controlled scrimmages. We talk about some of those games where we lock players into zones, and that really can reinforce that 1v1 defending on the wide, the central defending in the middle. Those are all ways to train these skills in small-sided games. And again, all the roles combine to make that goal of making the field small on defense, being compact in front of the ball to make it hard for the opposition to play through and make them have to go around, keeping them out of the center of the field. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. Obviously, the 8 has the most difficult position on the field. The central midfield is just, there's so many things going on. As they say in fighter pilot lingo, it's a target-rich environment, and there's lots and lots going on. Being able to keep your head on a swivel is a super important skill. But I hope you also learned that the 9 has defensive responsibilities that can't be overlooked. It's a long, lonely job standing up there, screening those center backs and getting ready for a transition to attack, but they can't switch off. They can't just take a vacation when they don't have the ball. So I hope that both of these videos in the 2 parts can help you when you're training your team through small-sided games and other ways, so that your players begin to understand when they lose the ball what should they do, where should they go to try and make the field small and compact so that you have the best chance of defending your goal, getting the ball back, and going having fun trying to attack the other net. Till next time, I hope your teams have a great time on the fields. And until then, I'll see you later. Bye.